Good morning or good afternoon, good evening to everyone. It's my pleasure again to host another Kumi Now session, where today we'll be marking and focusing on the discrimination of Palestinians in the education system in Israel. Before I introduce our special guest, let me just remind everybody of some housekeeping rules. So please remain mute throughout the conversation. We are recorded live and we are streaming live, and we'll also be recording this conversation. So if you choose to remain anonymous, please do so now. Any questions that you may have, please post them in the chat, and I will ask them towards our guest speaker. So now let me introduce Lama Mansour. So Lama Mansour is a PhD student in social intervention and policy evaluation, supervised by Professor Jane Barlow and a recipient of the Rhodes Scholarship. Her research focuses on higher education policy with a focus on interventions aiming to support students from marginalized communities in higher education institutions. Lama has recently completed a master's in evidence-based social intervention and policy evaluation with distinction in the department in Oxford. Prior to this, she has received a BA in psychology on the Academic Excellence Scholarship of Ofakim at the University of Haifa in 2018, where she explored the intergenerational transmission of collective memory of second and third generations of the Palestinian Nakba. Alongside her PhD studies, Lama is a part of the research team in evaluating the impact of the Noor Initiative, which aims to support and empower young Palestinian Arab women in Israel. Apart from this, Lama is also active within Palestinian Christian initiatives such as the Christ at the Checkpoint Conference and Young Adult Group. So with that, I welcome Lama. Welcome to the Kumi Now session.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So we're marking today the discriminations Palestinian citizens of Israel experience within the education system. But briefly, the education system in Israel is quite complicated. Could you explain a bit more about the system and how there's different tracks within the education system in Israel?
Yes, so the K-12 education system inside of Israel is divided into 4 tracks. One is the state secular, and that's the biggest one. One is the state religious, and there's an independent religious one, and then there's the Arab one. The Arab one is Arabic speaking, and within it there are some variations, including recognized but not official church affiliated schools, which are partially funded by the state. And on those schools in particular, in the last few years, there's been increased tightening on these schools, increasingly fewer funds, despite the fact that these schools, the church affiliated schools, are some of the best in the country, some of the highest performing in the country. I'm a graduate of one of these schools, so that kind of to kind of say that. But I think it's really important to think about the K-12 education system in Israel in terms of its goals. And these 4 tracks have the same goals, educational goals. And I was looking them up today to kind of reread them. And what really caught my eye is one of these goals, which is maybe the second or the third one, which is instilling the values of the Israeli Declaration of Independence and Israel's values as a Jewish and democratic state, and develop an attitude of respecting human rights and basic liberties. And then it says to teach the history of Israel, of the Jewish people, the Israeli and Jewish tradition. So the Arab track does not have its own educational goals. It's kind of under the big educational system. And it really shows that the Israeli education system, the K-12 system, is designed to keep the Palestinian citizens, the Arab citizens of Israel, kind of in their place, knowing in their place, knowing where their place is, what the terms of their existence in the state within the broader system of Israeli oppression, of Israeli statehood, and them being second-class citizens. So the education system kind of reinforces that and puts it really clearly, even if in its goals.
I think it's important, when people from abroad think about Palestinians, usually they think about Palestinians in Gaza, Palestinians in the West Bank. But Palestinian citizens of Israel, like yourself and myself, we go through a very different experience, and that is, you can see that in the educational system, in the schools that we go to. Could you speak about, from your own personal experience and also from your studies, how can you see Zionism implemented within the curriculum? Where do you see that within your own experience and with others as well?
Yeah. So before even talking about the curriculum, we can look at the funds that the Arab track gets in comparison with the rest of the tracks, the educational tracks. Even though these schools teach 100% of the core curriculum, unlike some other tracks, for example, the independent religious track, which doesn't teach the whole curriculum. They don't teach maths and English to a certain extent. Even though we do teach in all of these schools the whole curriculum, we are extremely underfunded. Some estimates say that a Jewish Israeli kid receives, or an Arab Palestinian kid receives, 1/9 of the funding that a Jewish Israeli kid has in school, pupil in school. So we can see it from even the funding system and how these schools are situated in that sense. There's also a big, the Arab education system is tightly controlled by the state. So the head teachers, basically all of the decision makers inside of the education ministry, they're heavily vetted by the security services, by Shin Bet, by Israeli decision makers, basically. So they won't appoint anyone that they don't want there. So that's kind of important to say. The Arab education system, Arabs they're not part of the policy making in terms of the curriculum, in terms of what sorts of content, what sorts of books are brought into the schools. These are all decisions that are made without Arabs inside those decision-making processes. So again, we're told, stay in your place. You just teach. You don't decide what is being taught. You don't decide what books are made. And that brings us to a point where the curriculum is outdated. It's not fit for purpose. And it doesn't prepare students for higher education, which is kind of what I do, but it doesn't prepare us also for life, not just for higher education. So that creates a problem. And in terms of the curriculum, I mean, I remember from my own experience, I was taught more about the French Revolution than the Nakba. We were taught about Arab history only in the terms of a Muslim, the history of Islam. And we were not taught anything about the narrative of the Palestinians of what happened in 1948 and the Nakba. Very much Zionist narratives of there was nothing here. We came, the Jewish Israelis came and made the desert bloom. In civics, for example, there's a lot of talk about Israel being a Jewish and democratic state without really exploring truly in a meaningful way the contradiction between these two terms. They maybe talk about a little bit of tension, but it's all very simplified, toned down, and really presents the Zionist narrative in the end. So you can see things in things like that. And I know of students who were penalized, for example, for writing in the civics exam, in the final matriculation exam, the Bagrut exam, they criticized the state of Israel in one of their answers, and they were penalized for it. And they got marks taken down and received a lower mark because of that. So lots of little things little and small things that you can, and big things, sorry, that you can see in the education system and how it positions itself towards the Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel.
Yeah, and it shows you how perhaps Palestinian citizens of Israel face a kind of different obstacle than other Palestinians, which is navigating an identity crisis that is taught from an early age in in the education system. The whole idea of assimilation starts entering the conversation, and from my own experience, also you can see how Zionism is not only taught in a secular way, but also in a theological way. The way when you are tested on biblical studies, which is a mandatory subject to take, they talk about Joshua, they talk about Ezra and Nehemiah, all of these figures that talk about the return of the land, and the land belongs to you. So you can really see those links in every single subject. And people might say, well, schools are always going to be really touched by state entities and by the Ministry of Education, but higher education is a place of freedom. It's a place of plurality of opinions. It's something that is celebrated. Would you say Palestinians feel that within transitioning into higher education? What exactly are you finding within your research?
Yeah, so it's important to say that, so I guess kind of the context here is really important, right? Because the segregation that exists between Palestinians and Jewish Israelis within Israel is really important here, because you have almost exclusively either Jewish Israeli cities or Palestinian localities. There's no really mixing in terms of geography. So you get these Palestinian students who are able to make it into higher education. There are lots of barriers in the entry to higher education. It's important to say that. There are many, we can talk about them maybe later. But they get there, they get to higher education. And because their localities are segregated, and because the state of Israel refuses to start a university in an Arab locality, and there has been calls maybe to start university in my hometown of Nazareth, but they've refused over the years. These students have to move away from their homes at 18, 19, go to a Jewish Israeli city, maybe for the first time, being surrounded by people who don't speak their language, and enter these campuses where they are faced, maybe for the first time, with the reality of being a minority in such a stark way, because they are so much in their own segregated localities across the years. That's kind of the first point of prolonged contact with the Jewish Israeli majority, and that is a big shock. It's a cultural shock, it's a linguistic shock, it's an academic shock. As I said, the education system is really bad, so you enter university and you're asked to think critically, to read all of these texts that are not in your language. They're often in English, which is your third, if not fourth language. So it's a really big shock. Now, in terms of academic freedom, I think I will say, to be completely honest, universities are sometimes better than the rest of the public spaces in Israel. And there are some of the most left-wing people in the country are in universities. So that allows some freedom. But again, in the context of, I can say for myself, I was so afraid when I went to university that I asked a question wrong or something in my first year, and I was the lecturer responded to me in a very kind of aggressive way, and it shut me up for 2 years. And it wasn't until my 3rd year that I was able to engage again in academic settings. So the terms of academic freedom have to be situated in that context of Arab students being really, really afraid and being really shocked and being really kind of taken aback by these conditions. And of course, there are tightenings over students. So for example, a recent thing that happened at the University of Tel Aviv, the students wanted to host a book fair, which they always host inside the university. This year, the university decided, no, we're not going to let you host this book fair inside of the campus. You can host it outside of the campus. Now, first of all, where the place they suggested was a place of where there were construction being made. So it wasn't really logical, and that's the first thing. But the second thing is that when you move an event such as this outside of the campus, you're subjecting students, you're making them vulnerable to violence from right-wing settlers, from extremist groups, from groups like Im Tirtzu, who's this like really extreme group who kind of persecute Palestinian academics and everyone who speaks up for Palestinian academics. So, decisions like these are not uncommon. There was another incident in the Hebrew University of Jerusalem where some Palestinian students were playing music in Arabic on campus, and 2 students who were police officers, but not in uniform, arrested them inside of the campus. And that was, if you cannot be safe in the campus, then when can you be safe? What gives them the authority? What gives such students the authority to arrest other students inside of the campus without the interference of university security and so on? So that's kind of the general atmosphere in higher education, and kind of that transition that's really difficult for students throughout that transition.
Yeah, and I think all of us can relate that if you're in an academic setting, in any kind of setting of education, and you're afraid not only physically, but also getting attacked for your own voice, like you said, that university professor shut you up for 2 years, it really limits the amount of growth you can do.
Yeah.
I'm just reacting towards that and seeing that it makes you feel dumb. It makes you feel, that you don't belong there. You're not worthy of even being a part of a higher education institution.
Yeah. And if I can kind of add to that, I remember from my time at the first year I was at university in Haifa, this Im Tirtzu group, they had a stand and they were giving out flyers that had the title Nakba Kharta, which just means the Nakba is a farce, it's a myth. And they were allowed to distribute flyers like that on campus. And just kind of remembering the emotions that you feel, that as soon as you enter the university, that's what you're faced with. So there was a lot of that that was allowed to be on campus, while things that are Palestinian were much more kind of watched very closely, if they are allowed to happen at all.
I think it's connected to the subject. And it's, I'm going to look at a quote or I quoted you within the article you wrote, and I hope the article can be posted in the chat that you recently published. If not, I'll do it later. But you say something that is very thought-provoking. It's very and it's not only within academic research, but it's in general in life, discussing your own positionality. So you say, my choice of topic, question framing, and analysis are all influenced by my identity as a female Palestinian Christian citizen of Israel and my experience as an undergraduate student at the University of Haifa. when you were discussing the obstacles that Palestinians have within transitioning to higher education in Israel. Could you elaborate what that exactly means? How is that applicable to ourselves as people who do not necessarily write academically or do write academically? And how is that shed light to the findings that you found?
Yeah, so I think that's it's really important within research and more generally, like you said, to acknowledge your own, where you're coming, how you're coming to the research. And that's called reflexivity, kind of turning the researcher's lens on yourself. Asking, why am I interested in this topic? Why am I approaching it this way and not that? So for example, for me, why am I talking to students, not talking to lecturers, asking them about the students' experiences or talking to student counselors or whatever. So kind of asking yourself that questions, what assumptions am I making based on my own experience? And it's especially important when you're an insider researcher, which means, you're doing research on a community that you belong to. So it's important to see the similarities. It was important for me to see the similarities between myself, my own experience with those of the students who I'm researching, but also to see the differences. So for example, I'm Christian. Some of the students I spoke to were Muslim, some of them Muslim women. So they wore hijab, some of them. So that changes things when you're at university, when you're visibly Palestinian, as you can tell by looking at a person that they're Palestinian, that changes your perspective. And I had to be, attuned to that. I had to kind of pay attention to that. I have a family which supported my education and my educational journey. Some students don't have that. So I had to be also aware of the differences of the barriers that exist when you don't have a family that's supportive of you, and things like that. So it was important for me that I don't make any assumptions about the experiences of students based on my own experience. I think that was really important. And kind of another thing that I always think about is most of my research is done in Arabic, but then it is translated into English. And I'm the one usually that's translating. So translation is also another process of constructing meaning that's influenced by me, the researcher. So what words do I choose? One example is the students use the word fasl, which could mean separation, and it could also mean segregation. So it was on me to choose which word I use. And I had to consult with others. I had to ask sometimes ask the participants again to see which word resonates more with them. So it's lots of these small dilemmas that I think are really important for, first of all, academic rigor, but also to be honest about these students' experiences. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's the same, I think, for anything we do in life. Whether how we interpret scripture, how we understand our faith, how we even navigate a conversation. What dynamics do we have, me as a host and you as a guest speaker and the audience itself, having it in English, having it in Arabic, in Hebrew, it's very, very true. And I think part of, the myth of having a neutral perspective is usually those who are dominant, who have a certain hegemonic control over, what positionality is being played. So I think it's very relevant in your research, and I think in our daily interactions. Okay, so we see that there's racism, discrimination within the curriculum, within educational in schools from 1st grade to 12th. We see that there are obstacles to Palestinian students that are transitioning to higher educations. It's the first time really encountering Israelis for many. This is mostly for the North, especially. What do we do? What do you suggest we do to counter that? What is the way forward? Maybe not us, but in general, what do you?
Yeah, it's really important because a lot of money is being funded now, is being, given to universities to do these programs for integration on campus and to help Arab students. That's the language that's used, and I you know, it's a positive thing that there is some more attention is being given to this to this topic, and I need to say, despite all the barriers that exist, in the last decade we've seen a doubling of the number of students, of Arab students in Israeli higher education, and it's a huge leap, and it's a testament to the strength and resilience of these students and just their determination to progress and to develop. But what do we do? I think the first thing, and I speak a little bit about that, I think in the article, is the prevalent approach, the common approach is what research calls a deficit perspective. And deficit perspectives is attributing basically academic problems. So let's say this student is not doing well, academically. So we attribute this thing to the student themselves, to the community itself. So we say Arab students are just dumb. They're just not hardworking. They're just lazy. The whole community is lazy. And we do hear some of that. And even I was looking at one of the documents released by the Council for Higher Education, the Israeli Council for Higher Education, it uses some of that language. It says it's a problem that Arab students speak Arabic, you know, instead of seeing it as an asset, instead of seeing it as, oh my God, these students are trilingual and they overcome all of these barriers in order to be here. So let's see what the system can do to support them, or how we can change the system as to suit their needs. So for example, it's not a problem that their mother tongue is Arabic. It's a problem that the system only caters to the Jewish Israeli Ashkenazi student. You know, that's the problem, not the students themselves. So a change in perspective is the first thing. I think, and this has started to happen in some of the universities, you know, offering some courses in Arabic. That's really important. Changing some of the curriculum. It's, you know, the Zionist narratives are so prevalent in higher education. The militarization, the centrality of the Israeli military on campuses. You have sometimes students coming in military uniform to the classes, you know, with the rifle on their, you know, on them. How can you learn in such an environment? You know, that needs to be changed. That needs to be dealt with. And so on and so forth. So it's, one of the students, you know, told me, when I was asking them about the support that they receive from the university and if it's good and if it's not. And he was like, you can't throw in a bit of extra time during exams and expect everything to be solved. And that's, you know, a really popular policy that universities do. So we have to fix a lot of the things that are in the system. We have to transform the system so that universities and higher education as a whole is a place where everyone can thrive. You know, everyone's assets, everyone's strengths can be recognized and celebrated rather than kind of put down. And maybe something that I didn't talk about before, but financially, it's really important to also talk about higher education. And that's kind of in the general, within the context, Palestinian citizens of Israel are one of the most disadvantaged groups socioeconomically in Israel. So we come to higher education, that doesn't stop. We have to finance our own tuition. A lot of the scholarships are specifically for those who have done the military service. So it automatically excluded from that. For those who are reservists, also automatically excluded from that. For those who are religious Jews, also excluded from that. For those who are Ulim Hadashim, they just did Aliyah, they just came to the country, also excluded from that. So all of these mechanisms of funding also need to be changed. Some more money needs to be put into funding higher education specifically for Arab citizens of Israel. And it is being done slowly and very insufficiently, but it is being done at the moment.
I have a few questions, but
yes.
this is a question that I just thought of now.
Yeah,
You mentioned the system.
yeah.
You mentioned change within, without, all of these different ways, and absolutely. Um, but how do you relate to other experiences of Palestinians who are transitioning to higher education in the occupied territories?
Mm.
Because whilst their challenges are very different, they at times can't even access the facility, or even when studying, they're under tear gas or under curfews. Um, they have a whole different dimension of obstacles, but it's rooted in the same person who's deciding the decisions.
Yeah.
So in changing the system, should we include also that aspect of Palestinian obstacles within Palestinians transitioning to higher education? Do you
I
understand
think
my
so.
question?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's all connected, right? It's in the broad scheme of things. Universities are not uh, universities are complicit in the occupation. They provide the expertise, they provide the knowledge, they provide the funds, they provide the training for the pilots, and so on and so forth. Even before 1948, the Technion and the Hebrew University of Jerusalem were founded before 1948, and ex almost explicitly to help the Zionist militias and provide them with academic knowledge in order to start this new country. So you can't divorce these things from one another. And in the end, yes, it's all designed to keep Arabs in their place. I just said that there's been a doubling of Arab students in higher education, but if you look in terms of the academic staff, we're still at like 3% or 4% in some of the best cases. So yes, you can get educated, but stay in your place. Know your place. You're not part of the decision making, a kind of level. You can be educated, but know where your boundaries are. And I think it's very similar to those in in the occupied territories. While it's much more brutal and kind of tangible, it's all the same logic of the system of you can't get too big because you have to stay small in order to stay in this country or within this land.
And it's interesting, the relationship between the the level of education that Palestinian Christians have,
Mm.
and the fact that the education system doesn't teach you how to live, doesn't teach you your own identity. So a lot of Palestinian Christians leave
Mm.
because, there's an interesting connection there. And another connection is maybe international students that maybe provide a very, international schools, sorry, that provide maybe a safe place to study in
Mm.
terms of your schooling, but do they teach you your own identity? Do they teach you, do you learn the French Revolution, or do you learn about the Nakba?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not so clear. And I just want to go back to the higher education.
Yeah.
So campuses all around the world, higher education all around the world, have been places where grassroots movements have been cultivated, where movements to challenge the status quo of a certain society, of a state, has been present. We see this all the time. My experience is you have societies
Mm.
when I studied in the UK. And you have, the conservative society, and you have the Marxist society. So you
Mhm.
have all of these societies, and you have the freedom to demonstrate, perhaps maybe except for Palestine, where you get different obstacles, even internationally. But we see this also in Israel. We see campuses in Tel Aviv and in Haifa and in the Hebrew U, where Palestinian students, young people, are showing their identity, they're showing their voice. And this was especially witnessed during the Unity Intifada, or the events of summer 2021. yet still there was policing, still there was violence. Could you talk a bit more about that aspect of experience that Palestinian students experience within Israeli higher educational institutions?
Yeah, so this is something that I'm working on now, and interviewing students and lecturers and civil society organizations, members of these organizations, to ask them really what was happening during May 2021, the summer of 21. You know, the Sheikh Jarrah issue, the assault on Gaza, the issues in Jerusalem, the restrictions in Jerusalem, and so on. You know, how were those protests, the eruptions of those protests, that intifada, some people call it the uprising of dignity, and those protests across inside of Israel, how did students experience that? And the most prominent thing that I've been hearing is that students felt deeply unsafe. Deeply unsafe. The threat of violence was just kind of looming all around. A lot of students experienced direct physical violence. So in protests, for example, where police were just, using excessive force, throwing stun grenades, skunk water, bullets, usually rubber bullets, but sometimes also live bullets. I've spoken to people, these are not students, but we know of people that lost their eye during those protests. So lots of direct physical violence, but also verbal violence. So, student chat groups were rife with racism and harassment and, saying all sorts of things. But because these are private spaces, university didn't really want to interfere there. But at the same time, I heard from students who wrote something on Facebook, on Instagram, shared a video or something, and someone screenshotted what they had written or what they had shared, and then reported them to their universities, and they had to be tried internally. And faced disciplinary action. So some people had to be suspended from their studies for a year. Some people had to, were fined money. They had to pay money for expressing their views online. One student whose kind of case went, was really famous, is a student who quoted from Mahmoud Darwish in a protest next to her campus in Beersheba, in Ben Gurion. And it was a big trial, and they wanted to suspend her, and then they wanted to kick her out. And I think it's even still ongoing. But, these spaces that are supposedly spaces for, discussions and freedom of speech, when it came down to it, they cracked down on freedom of speech, and they didn't keep their students safe. There was a case in the Technion, in the dorms, in one of the dorms that's near the sea, not in the main campus. But some people came and marked the dorms of the Arab students in red. They marked them to know where they are. And later at night, someone came and started banging on the door. Some cars were destroyed, just terrorizing students. People were taking out of if someone was in a car, sometimes they were taken out of their cars and beaten. So really horrific scenes and horrific things were happening throughout that time. And I'm still kind of trying to make sense of it all. But yeah, it was a very scary time. And the thing that some students at least were telling me, that they were not protected by the university. They were on campus, they were not protected by the university. On the contrary, for some of them, they were, prosecuted by the university for things they said. And for others, there were departments that were really good, some lecturers that were really good and intentional about supporting Arab students and telling them, you know what, if you don't want to come to class today, that's fine, you can go. So there's more, kind of a bit of both, but the negative aspects really just completely overshadows the small, you know, flickers of hope and of understanding and of support within academic spaces during that time.
Yeah, and I guess areas where Palestinians are targeted are also transformed into areas of resistance.
Yeah.
You know, although Palestinians are discriminated and under erasure by the settler colonial project of Zionism, you still go to university and get educated. They still try, you know, even in higher education's institutions like Birzeit and Jamiat al-Najah, you still get amazing academic works. You still get works produced, and that's, you know, hope.
Yeah.
And you talk about hope, not in necessarily, maybe in your studies.
Yeah, actually, maybe I'll say something about that, because that's right that universities were not providing protection for students, but they did that for each other. You know, they created these informal networks of protection where, for example, if a group of girls didn't feel safe in their apartments because they were in a, you know, in a neighborhood that regularly had right-wing extremists, you know, storming through it and shouting and throwing stuff, they would have, you know, other students who don't necessarily know them sometimes, you know, some guys would come and stay and keep guard in front of their doors all night so that they can feel safe and sleep in their own houses. So yes, the university didn't provide that protection, but they provided it for each other and were, you know, telling each other what to do. They were creating these group chats where they were talking about how they felt. Of course, they advocated online. They talked about Sheikh Jarrah. They talked about what's happening in Jerusalem, in Gaza. So it's really impressive in that. And it's something that students say that, yes, it was a really dark time and a time of a lot of oppression. At the same time, there was a lot of resilience and a lot of community building and community resistance and mobilization. So for me, I drew a lot of hope from listening to those experiences.
It sounds like to me creative resistance. Even when we travel from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, there's now an application that tells you if a checkpoint is closed or not, or which checkpoints are, you know, have more traffic. So now we've created applications to help us navigate, you know, geographical lines. So sounds to me very much connected to last week's Kumi about art as a form of resistance. Lama, you're not only a researcher on education, but I would say you're in yourself someone who takes your Christianity very seriously. And in a number of platforms that Ryan has shared, you talk about the relationship between lament and hope. Please tell us that relationship. Tell us what you mean by that, and how does that help us navigate the struggles of life and the struggles of being under oppression.
Yeah, I think those are intrinsically linked, lament and hope. And I actually started thinking about lament and hope a little bit before that, but I thought about it a lot during the May 2021 events. I was here in the UK, and I was worried about my friends and my family and their safety, and seeing the scenes online, and felt really helpless. With some other friends, we started these kind of daily calls of just venting sometimes, of just talking, praying, but they weren't prayers that I was used to. The prayers that I was used to in church were about declaring victory and about, all things will be well. And the prayers that we prayed at that time were filled with hurt, because that was our situation. We were really, really hurt and really disappointed and really angry and really frustrated. And after some study and, looking at the scriptures, I realized that that's not, that's not unbiblical. It's very, very biblical to come as your whole self, to come honestly to God and lament and say, God, where is the justice? All I can see is injustice. In Habakkuk, why do you not listen, Lord? And that doesn't mean, and I think that's what I started to learn, is that it doesn't mean that you don't have faith in God. Actually, the contrary. Because you have faith in God, you come to Him with all of your frustrations, with all of your pain, with all of your anger. And actually, when we stop lamenting is when I see a problem. Because if we stop lamenting, it means that we don't expect any better, that we don't expect that our world was made for goodness, that our world was made for better, So I think there's a lot of hope in lament. And I think those who don't lament are either completely out of touch with the world or are hopeless. And so they don't see, any way out. So they don't even try. And again, just to clarify, I don't think there's anything wrong with declaring victory. It's important, it's necessary. But I think if we only focus on the victories and we don't acknowledge the brokenness of the world around us, first of all, it separates us, it disconnects us and isolates us from the societies that we're supposed to serve and be a part of and be a light and a salt to. But also, we are not obeying God, I think. Because God asks us to be engaged in our societies, and if He wanted to just save us and then be done with us, then He would have just taken us straight into heaven. But we still have years here, and I think the first step of being our neighbor's keeper is, and the first step to loving our neighbor is to lament with them and be honest about, the injustices, the occupation, the discrimination. It pains me to think about the housing crisis in the Palestinian society. It pains me to think about the crime crisis in the Palestinian society, how many people have been killed in the past few years. It pains me to think about the checkpoints that are increasing and the people who are, callously being killed every day. And if I don't go with this pain to God, then where am I keeping it? Then I'm not being honest.
Holy tears, holy sadness.
Tears. Yes.
It's very powerful, and many, many lessons to be learned from that. There's a certain wisdom that comes from that. I'm going to ask a few questions for the time remaining, which is not much because I've enjoyed our conversation. So there's a question: are there any schools that are mixed Palestinian Israeli and Jewish Israeli children in the same school?
There are some, very, very few. I think Yad Biad is one of them. But I think because of the way that the education system is set up, that's very difficult. Because then you have mainly the language barrier. So I think they have to, I don't know much about them, so this with their own curriculum. They have to make some decisions about how they, have the and yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Lama, the Wi-Fi is cutting a bit, so I guess we can all lament that we missed some of that answer. This is another question. I hope you can hear me on my end. Yeah, you're still a bit broken, but I'm going to ask the question anyways and pray that things will get fixed. So Palestinians are not even second-class. Oh, okay. I'm going to just ask the question. Palestinians are not even second-class citizens. They don't exist at all. Are they even acknowledged? I'm assuming that is to do with the curriculum. And I can speak from my own experience that they are acknowledged very partially, but not as the indigenous population, and at certain times, not even at all as Palestinians. Lama, you're back with us. Can you?
Yes, I just connected to a different, so now I should be good.
Amazing. So there was a question about Palestinians being mentioned or exist. You said that they're second-class citizens. Are they even mentioned at all? I'm assuming that's within the education system.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the Jewish-Israeli curriculum. I haven't studied it, to be honest. So I'm not sure. But yes, I caught the last of what you said. I think that's true. I think it's mentioned. You know, a lot of times people think of us as immigrants, and forget that we're indigenous to this. And yeah, a lot of racists would say, just leave. You know, if you don't like it, leave. We're indigenous. So no, we want to leave. And I think that attitude that's taken, that it's a minority group. Actually, it reminds me a little bit of, it's the same attitude that the Balfour Declaration has, 1970s, in 1917. And, you know, there it said all non-Jewish groups will have, you know, cultural rights, economic rights, and so on. And it's the same. We're not recognized as a national group, maybe as a cultural group. Maybe sometimes you'll hear us being referred to as Arabic speakers. For sure, you won't hear us being referred to as Palestinian. You would hear, you know, Arab Israelis, even international media. Although, you know, recent surveys show that the term that is most preferred by us, by the community itself, is Palestinian Arab citizens of Israel. But yeah, that's they refuse to say that because they don't want that connection with the Palestinian people. So I think that's the attitude that's usually held.
And I would add that we're even depicted as you know, as subjects of like as wild beasts waiting to attack. So we are seen as violent. We are depicted as a threat. And you can also see how the role of the militarization of the society influences the educational system, because you start recruiting soldiers and training them in the recruitment process in the 10th grade. So already in the 10th and 11th and 12th grade, Israeli students are starting to get familiarized with the army, and they're starting to prepare themselves for their military time. So you can even see, for me at least, I saw a shift where you're a minority, you're okay, you know, you're that kind of segment of society, but now this is the population that we need to protect ourselves from.
Yeah.
That's just another aspect. I don't know if this is something that you know, Lama, but I'll ask it anyways. So there's been an increase of number of arrests allegedly in Birzeit University. I think that might be true. And imprisonment of students, interviews with women students where their education is interrupted for months, if not years, simply because they are part of the student council, etc. Why are they arresting Palestinian female students, and why now? That's the question.
I'm sorry to say that I don't know enough about it to know. I will say that a lot of time it's a matter of collusion between some elements of the Palestinian Authority with Israel in terms of, you know, closure of universities and persecution of students. But I don't know enough about this particular case and this particular phenomenon to comment on it. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I'd like to ask a question as I don't see anyone in the chat yet.
Yeah.
Ilan Pappé wrote a book called The Forgotten Palestinians, which is the Palestinians within the borders of 48. We call them Palestinian citizens of Israel. Why is it important for you to research on that segment of the Palestinian population? And why is it important for others to also discuss the obstacles that Palestinian citizens of Israel face?
Yeah, I think for me it's important because I say it's one big therapy project for me. my at least the first part of my PhD. I want to understand what I went through in during undergrad, and not just me, my friends and people I know. So it was important for me to understand the big mechanisms of what is happening. That's first. Second, I think this segment of society in particular, I think we're vastly misunderstood. As I just said, like you'll see in international media, us being referred to as Israeli Arabs. And that's not a term that's used by us. So we're constantly being, researched by others, by Western scholars, by Israeli scholars, and we don't have a voice. So I wanted to have a voice about what is being written about, my own community and my own people. And I think it's really important because I've seen, as you read in the bio, I've worked in a few other research areas, and I saw that even experts of Palestinian women, they call them Arab women or women in the Arab society, they just had so many misconceptions about what's happening in the community, and it felt really dishonest. And they kept disregarding the role of the state. So for example, they would speak about violence against women, but they wouldn't speak about the bigger context of Israeli oppression, of Israeli occupation, of the underfunding of Arab localities, and so on and so forth. So for me, it's important to be in these spaces so that people don't talk on behalf of a community that they've never been a part of, that they don't know the nuances of the experience. Yeah, I hope that answered your question.
I think so. Yeah, just before I give you the last word, and I want you to perhaps give us a bit more of a reflection on lament and hope. One thing you would give us as we leave, as we go out now to the rest of the days, we continue with our daily lives. Just one last reflection, but just before you do that, next week we'll be having a talk with one of the municipality members of Bethlehem city. We will be discussing about the situation in Bethlehem, and so stay tuned for next week, and make sure you look at the newsletter that Ryan sent an email about Kumi Now. And also make sure to visit the link, the article that Lama wrote, the podcast, the speeches that she's given. There's so much to learn. So if you're interested more to learn about what was spoken today, please look at the links and share also this conversation to others in your respective platforms. So just for the end, Lama, give us something to take on with us regarding lament and hope.
Yeah, I'll share something that I shared a little bit about in the Crisis Checkpoint conference last year, 2 years ago, last year. And that's first, lament as prophetic truth telling. So prophecy in the Bible is speaking truth to power and calling things what they are. And I think when we lament, when we call the situation in Palestine, occupation, when we name things for what they are around us, it's prophetic. And when we're prophetic, we're truth tellers. And I think that's very, very important. We're not vague, we're not abstract when we're lamenting. We call things for what they are. And we're invited to be honest with God and with ourselves and with the society that we live in. And the second thing I kind of want to draw our attention to is that in lament, we're defying the systems of this world. I think the darkness that's in this world wants us to be hopeless, wants us to look at the situation and say, that's it, it's all hopeless, there's nothing that can be done. But in lament, when we're taking these things to God, we're saying, no, there is something to be done. The Palestinians deserve better than this. Israelis deserve better than this. This land can be something else. It can be something beautiful. It can be a beacon of hope and of shared respect and mutual flourishing. But it's not. So we're defying the notion of helplessness. We're defying the notion of there's nothing that can be done. So by lamenting, we're standing in, I think, holy defiance, a defiance that's rooted in scripture, that's rooted in our faith in God, and that is rooted in the love that we have for ourselves and for our neighbors. And I think that's what I want to leave with you.
Amen. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Lama, for an amazing and
powerful Thank you for having me.
So really our pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for attending another Kumi session. Please join us next week. Stay tuned to all our posts. And yeah, have a good rest of your day, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening. Goodbye, everyone.